He practiced us with a belt in his hand. If you miss a step, expect to be,
You just said that you would practice the dance steps and your father would be holding a belt in his hand. Is that what you just said?
Yes. And he would tear you up if you missed. Because he sat in a chair and he had this belt in his hand. And if you didn't do it the right way, he would tear you up, really get you.
Michael Jackson frequently spoke about the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father. In his controversial 2003 interview with Martin Bashir, he became teary-eyed as he recalled how his father had treated him. "It was bad," he said, referring to the beatings. "Really bad." Watching him recall those days when his father beat him was truly painful. Despite all the years that had passed, it was clear that this part of his childhood was still traumatic for him. Young Michael was a captivating child. "He always looked different from my other children," says his mother Catherine. "I don't believe in reincarnation, but you know how babies move jerkily. Michael never moved like that. When he danced, he moved as if he were much older. Michael was a child who matured early." His mother remembers that when he was just a year and a half old, he would hold his bottle and dance to the sound of the washing machine. His grandmother, Crystal Johnson, remembers her grandson starting to sing when he was about 3 years old. "What a beautiful voice he had," she says excitedly. Even then, it was a joy to listen to him. Michael was a sensitive child who didn't deserve such mistreatment from his father. He was also very fast and would rather run away than confront Joseph. Tito illustrates this. He was so fast that when dad or mom would yell at him, he would immediately get out of their way, and they would be yelling at the air. Joseph was someone who believed in the value and effectiveness of physical punishment as a disciplinary tool. "In life, you are either a winner or a loser. None of my children will ever be losers," he would often say. To ensure this, he would hit them to make sure they followed the right path toward being winners without a second thought. However, Michael was the only one in the family who would sometimes attempt to retaliate when provoked by his father. Once, when he was just 3 years old, Joseph had slapped his bottom for something he had done. Michael, crying, took off one of his shoes and threw it at his father. The shoe missed Joseph, who shouted, "Are you crazy? Kid, you've just signed your own death warrant. Get over here." In a fit of rage, Joseph caught Michael, and according to Marlon, he held him by one leg and dangled him upside down, repeatedly punching him in the back and on the hips. Michael screamed and cried so loudly, it was as though he was calling for help from the entire neighborhood. "Let him go, Joseph," Catherine screamed. "You're going to kill him! You're going to kill him!" When Joseph finally let him go, Michael ran to his room, crying, "I hate you." These were fighting words from Joseph. He followed him to the bedroom and slammed the door. One time, Joseph locked Michael in a closet for hours, says a friend of the Jackson family. It was a traumatic and terrifying experience for him. Catherine didn't know how to adapt to Joseph's behavior towards the children. How could this man, who was gentle enough to kiss her fingertips in a romantic moment, turn around and beat his children? As a woman with a fear of God, her husband's actions were unfathomable to her. She didn't know what to do about it. She loved her husband, but she was also afraid of him. Though she sometimes raised her voice, she did so reluctant. In reality, Catherine was also one of Joseph's targets for his anger. When Rebbe was still a baby, Joseph, exhausted from lack of sleep and his grueling work schedule, was tense and irritable. One day, when he came home from work, he found the baby crying while Catherine was outside chatting with the neighbors. He ran outside to catch her. "The kid's head is going to explode from crying," he shouted at Catherine. Catherine immediately turned back to the baby. She remembered saying to her husband, "Sorry, Joseph, I didn't notice he woke up." Suddenly, Joseph turned around and punched his wife in the face. "My cheek was numb," Catherine remembers. Her reaction was quick and full of rage. She grabbed a ceramic bottle warmer and threw it at Joseph with all her strength. It hit Joseph's arm, cutting it deeply before shattering. As the fight continued, blood was spurting from the wound. "Don't ever hit me again," Catherine warned him, "or I'll leave you before you can even turn your head." Catherine later said that this was the first and last time Joseph hit her, but it seemed that Joseph had directed his violent temperament toward the children. When Michael was 5, he staggered toward one of the rooms and suddenly found himself tripped by Joseph falling to the floor in a pool of blood. "This is for what you did yesterday," Joseph said. "And tomorrow, it will be for what you're going to do today." Michael began to cry. "But I haven't done anything yet," he said through his tears. "You would have," Joseph replied. From then on, whenever Michael entered a room, he would look to his left and right, as if crossing a street, hoping to avoid his father's wrath. How could a little child deal with so much fear? "I started to be so afraid of that man," Michael recalls. "Actually, I think it's fair to say I hated him." Michael remembers that his father was always a mystery to him, and he was aware of it. "One of the things I regret most is that I could never be close to him," he says. In fact, none of the Jackson siblings were able to form a real closeness with their father, who was not affectionate. Joseph sometimes took the boys camping or fishing, or taught them how to box for self-defense, but he never showed interest in the girls. To put it mildly, Joseph's parenting was far from traditional. Whenever the boys would sneak out of their rooms at night, Joseph would go outside, climb up to their windows, and yell at them with a terrifying mask on his face, screaming at the top of his lungs. The children would be terrified, starting to cry, their breaths quickening. Why would a father subject his children to such trauma? Joseph justifies this by saying he was trying to teach them not to leave their windows open at night. What if a burglar had broken into the house? Michael and Marlon would later suffer nightmares about being dragged from their safe rooms. As Michael grew older, he distanced himself from Joseph as much as possible and clung to his mother, who he seemed to think of as his lifeline. Maybe she was. Even though he had 9 kids, he treated each one of us as if we were his only child, Michael told a writer in 1991. "I can't even imagine what it would have been like to grow up without a mother's love, thanks to Catherine's kindness, warmth, and care. The things she taught us were priceless. Kindness, love, and thoughtfulness towards people were at the top of her list." And what about Joseph? "Whenever I think of him, I feel like throwing up," Michael said succinctly. In his 2003 interview with Martin Bashir, Michael noted that Joseph had blue eyes. Clearly, he had never looked his father in the eyes because Joseph's eyes were not blue, but hazel, almost green. In many interviews, Michael Jackson often expressed his sadness about this, as it left a deep trauma in him. However, Michael had stated that he loved his father and had forgiven him.
And I totally forgive him for all of it, you know. You have to. But I don't allow my children to call me Michael. I say I'm Daddy. It's just the opposite.
What's your relationship like with him?
I love my father, but I don't know him.
Mm-hmm. Are you angry with him for doing that? I think that's pretty cruel, actually.
Am I angry with him?
Because adolescence is hard enough without a parent telling you that you're ugly.
It's very difficult.
Uh-huh.
Am I angry with him? Sometimes I do get angry, yes. I don't know him the way I'd like to know him. My mother's wonderful. To me, she's perfection. I just wish I could understand my father.
The American comedy drama television series Atlanta, developed by Donald Glover, explores the experiences of 2 cousins striving to make a name for themselves in the rap industry. Its 2nd season featured the 6th episode titled Teddy Perkins, which aired on April 5th, 2018. Teddy Perkins, a fictional character portrayed by Donald Glover, was central to this episode. As you may know, the details and clues given by the character in the series closely paralleled those associated with Michael. You're already familiar with this because our channel has produced several videos on this topic in the past. Teddy clearly states that his father, like Joseph Jackson, was a father who physically punished him and his brother.
It's my favorite part of the museum.
What the hell is this?
This is my father. He's the reason for all of this. When me and Benny were children, he instituted a very rigorous training method. Piano 3 hours a day, twice a day. Exams on Sundays. That if failed meant physical punishment. He wanted the best out of us. It's because of him we have all of this.
So you saying your dad used to beat you so you'd be good at piano?
To be good at life. We were a sacrifice.
But as Teddy grew up, he understood that his father's beatings were necessary for their future. for them to achieve better positions in life, and he expresses that his father's punishments were necessary for their discipline. So, Teddy justifies his father's actions and describes them as discipline. He expresses this thought with the following words.
We were a sacrifice.
Oh, well, I'm not trying to shit on your dad or nothing, man, but that seems a little unnecessary.
Most people wouldn't understand. To make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. I mean, to build bridges, people have to fall.
So, for Teddy and his brother to reach good positions, their father had to be disciplined because a young child can never know what is best for themselves. This is entirely Teddy's thought, and he clearly states that he is not angry with his father.
Are you not mad at your dad?
Of course not. There was no way for a child to understand what was at stake. He just wanted the best for us.
Indeed, Teddy was not angry with his father. He tried to understand him and eventually accepted that great things come from great pain.
My father used to say, great things come from great pain.
Indeed, Teddy was not angry with his father. He tried to understand him and eventually accepted that great things come from great pain. And Teddy, dedicating this part of the museum to great fathers, starts listing famous people's fathers. But when he mentions his own father and then Michael Jackson's father, he sends a significant message.
I want this wing of the museum to be dedicated to great fathers. My father, Joe Jackson, Marvin Gaye Sr., Tiger Woods' father, Serena Williams' father, the father that drops off Emilio Estevez in the Breakfast Club.
When he mentions my father, Joe Jackson, we understand that he is referring to Joe Jackson, confirming that his father is Joe Jackson. So, if Michael Jackson is trying to send us a message through Teddy, what should we understand from this? Could it be that Michael has forgiven his father and doesn't want us to speak ill of him? Perhaps Michael is trying to communicate that his father played a significant role in his journey to stardom and deserves respect, especially since Michael had already informed us that he forgave and loved his father. Why do some of his fans still judge him? If you watch our interview with Joseph's friend Tony, you can understand that certain events need to be viewed in the context of their time and generation. It's likely that Joseph too did not receive love from his father. He didn't know what love was and couldn't show something he didn't know to his children. Why can't we forgive him? Was the discipline he applied to Michael not crucial in Michael becoming a great star? As Teddy said, great things come from great pain. Would Prophet Joseph have become a sultan in Egypt if he hadn't been thrown into a well? If Joseph hadn't been a disciplined father, and if Michael hadn't suffered during his childhood, he might have joined gangs of the era or become a lost talent without dedicating himself to music, and we would have never known him. A child who doesn't experience pain, doesn't see the harsh realities of life, and doesn't have a disciplined father might not cling to music and work hard. Of course, a father should never be violent towards his child. This is a very wrong method. There could have been other ways to instill discipline, but as I said, Joseph had seen this in his family. He believed it was the right thing for his children, and yes, as a father, he did things he shouldn't have. But we all have our mistakes and sins, and by the way, we know the episode ends tragically. When we see the end of the story, we might think that the psychological issues Benny and Teddy faced could be the traumas inflicted by their father. Perhaps, even though Michael had forgiven his father, he wanted to show the lasting effects of the traumas he caused. Yes, Michael and his siblings reached great heights of fame under their father's discipline, but they lacked love. They suffered a significant trauma because they were not loved. I think Michael, while showing respect for Joseph's discipline, wanted to indicate that he still hadn't forgotten his father's mistreatment. Even if you reach good positions in your career, if you haven't received love from a father or mother, you feel a significant void and you never forget it. Michael wanted to show the children who don't experience a father's love never forget it and can have lasting psychological effects. So, in this story, Michael wants to show us that two different viewpoints can both seem right when looked at from different perspectives.
You know, not all great things come from great pain. Sometimes it's love. Not everything's a sacrifice.
Sacrifice is unnecessary, Darius.
Yeah, maybe. But your dad should have said sorry. I'm sorry. What if you would have been great at something else? Or if you would have seen love instead of all the other shit like Stevie.
I'm sorry.
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie had his own sacrifices. He was blind.
Yeah, but he wasn't blinded.
Joseph believed his method was correct, but it wasn't entirely right. Discipline and love needed to be balanced. A child can't be raised without discipline, nor without love. But Joseph himself had experienced this from his family, where love was not shown. Let's leave the judgment to Allah. After all, while Michael has forgiven his father, it's not right for us to still speak ill of Joseph. Do you still want to speak badly of him? Then let's throw a stone at him. But as Jesus said, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. Who will start?